G'day, I'm Scott Poynton and welcome to another podcast. And in this podcast, I want to follow up on the work that I've been doing in Ghana in the second half of 2022. Back in July 2022, I posted a podcast called Reflections on Ghana, where I really talked about the work that I'd done from around November 2021 and all through the first half of 2022 to set up a regenerative agricultural supply chain of Bambara nuts, a fantastic little legume that grows in West Africa. It's native to West Africa, and it is grown elsewhere, but native to West Africa. And the project with one of Pond Foundation's members, What If Foods, growing Bambara groundnut in the northern region of Ghana. And in that podcast, I just talked about some of the challenges that the project faced and also that the people faced, the community, the farmers faced. And I do encourage you to have a listen to that podcast if you want to get the background. I'm not going to go into all the background here, but there seems to be a lot of interest in the project, which is really exciting. I think it is an exciting project. And as we go forward into the second year of the project, 2023, we're seeing great excitement and great enthusiasm from the farmers, and this is super, super encouraging. So I wanted to bring you up to date with what unfolded in the second half of last year and some of the things that we learned. And there's so many things that we learned. I'm in the process of writing a book about it. In fact, I've written 2 draft chapters and trying to capture the essence of the experience because it was really moving and it was really humbling. And really had a lot of wonderful interactions with farmers and seeing how the farmers progressed from being pretty cynical at the start of the year. They've seen lots of companies come through their communities making grand promises about what they're going to do. And as the farmers pointed out, they tend never to see those people ever again. They just disappear. And we were challenged by that when we started the project back in the first meeting in Ghana was back in November and December 2021, where we visited 7 communities. People were keen. They made it clear they were engaged. They wanted to be engaged in the project, but they had this terrible experience where people actually stole from them and helped them get excited to the point where they incurred costs, and then those companies never came back again. We didn't want to be one of those. And so this podcast is the story about what happened in the second half of 2022 to grow a crop of Bambara beans. So it really started with getting seed, and that was an urgent push because what we found when we did talk to the farmers was while they were interested in the project, they didn't have any seed, and that was because they hadn't really grown Bambara in a major way for a long time. There is no market. There has been no market for Bambara. So the farmers, many of the farmers had actually eaten the seeds that they'd had from generations ago simply because there was no market. And so one of our challenges was to find seed. And the other thing to say is there's about 20, maybe there's more, 20, 25, 30 varieties of Bambara. Some of them are black, some of them are red. What If requires this special particular type of Bambara bean for its products. And so some of the farmers grew that type, but not all. So we were obliged to find the seed. And our partner there in Ghana, Mashud Fasheni from Casimar Limited, a partner company, did amazing work to get out there and locate the seed and buy seed to bring it into Tamale so that we could distribute it out to the farmers in all of the 25 communities that surrounded Tamale that we were partnering with. That was quite a job. We started late through no one's fault. It's just I got off the plane there on February the 3rd. Planting season really starts in early June. By the time we got everything up and running and understood what we needed to do, it was quite late, and then Mashud had to go out and actually buy the seed. And that meant that a lot of the farmers who were really excited to be part of the project eventually pulled out because they said, it's too late. If we plant now, we won't get good yields. We ended up planting in the middle of July, which is probably 4 to 6 weeks later than what is ideal. In some cases, it's okay. They plant in July and August, but in a lot of the areas we were planting, the farmers really preferred to plant in early to mid-June. So we were 4 to 6 weeks late. And of course, that was going to have an impact on the yield, given the growing season of the Bambara is only sort of 12 to 16 weeks. So we're already losing a chunk of the growing season by being late. But nonetheless, we decided to push on, and we were grateful that the farmers decided to push on too, because our objective last year was not to grow a certain amount of volume. Like we didn't say, okay, we want to grow 10 tonne or we want to grow 50 tonne or we want to grow 100 tonne. We hoped to get good yields, but the real objective last year was to build trust with the farmers, to show them that we weren't the same as all those other companies, that when we said we would do something, we would do it. And we told them that we would bring seed, and we did, and we were very pleased with that. We got it late. It was a miracle that we got any seed at all, but we got it. And the other thing we said is that we would bring technical support to them during the growing season, because what typically happens is that traders turn up, representing big companies, and they say, all right, here's the seed, here's the fertilizer, here's the pesticides, here's the herbicides. And they charge the farmers. The farmers don't have any money, so they can't buy it, but they get it lodged against their account effectively. And so they give it and then they go away. And they don't come again until the end of the season when the farmers are harvesting. And they say, right, now we'll buy your harvest. And by the way, we'll give you a very low price for it. Oh, and then we've got to take all these other costs off for the seed, for the fertilizer, for the pesticides and herbicides. So the farmers end up with very little money at the end of the year. That's the traditional way that the traders come and buy from them. So it's pretty grim. And I certainly noticed in the first half of 2022, during the dry season, that a lot of these farmers live in starvation because they don't make much money out of their work on the fields. And as the dry season unfolds, they run out of money and they haven't got any food. So they tend to just live on yams and cassava, which is like 98, 99% carbohydrates. So there's a huge problem with the children up there, aged 0 to 5. Almost 40% of the children in northern Ghana suffer from stunting, and that's because they don't get enough nutrients. So this is the sort of context in which we were working. And so I wanted to show the farmers that we were different, and part of that was to bring them seed, but part of that was to also say, no, we will be here during the growing season. Because what also happens is if the rains aren't very good or there's a pest and disease outbreak, the farmers certainly don't have the money to buy pesticides or anything to treat any pest outbreak. And of course, we don't want them to use those chemicals on the Bambara, but there are organic ways of doing that. And so we said, look, if those things happen, we will be here. We're not going to leave you alone. And the farmers were very grateful for that. So another one of our partners there in Ghana was a company called Rural AgriHub. And Rural AgriHub employed 5 agricultural field officers. And the idea of the field officers was that we would have one per district. We had 5 districts we were working in, 5 communities per district. So each agricultural field officer had 5 communities that they worked with to support and encourage to apply it's not really a pesticide, it's a pest repellent. There's a natural pest repellent they can use. They're made from the neem tree, which is not an indigenous tree. It's an invasive species, but it does grow everywhere. And they can take the leaves, and the leaves are very bitter. So they mix the leaves with water, spray that on the crop, and the insects find it way too bitter to eat, so they don't. So it's a pest repellent more than a pesticide. So we trained the farmers how to do that. We visited the crops. We advised them when it was a good time to weed, because the Bambara, like a lot of agricultural crops, doesn't like too much weed competition. So we were present. And at the end of the season, when we said we would come to buy the beans, we came to buy the beans. And this was really a revolutionary moment for the farmers, because even though some of them planted, they said, oh yeah, we don't think these people are going to come back and buy those beans. And we were like, well, why wouldn't we? We've given you the seed, we've come out during the season, we've seen you so much, we've had our agricultural field officers here. Of course we're coming to buy the beans. But they'd just been so burnt by the previous experiences with other companies that they said they weren't going to believe it until they saw it. And typically when they are selling their produce, they've got to take it to market to a central location. And we said, no, we'll come to the community and we'll buy it there from you. And that was a fascinating experience, because I think the farmers were very grateful that we did that. It saves them some money of having to transport their beans to the market. And of course, with the petrol prices being what they were in 2022, that made a big difference to them. But what was extraordinary, and this is a really key point of this idea of a regenerative revolution that I speak about, is that the traditional traders go, when they buy beans or all sorts of other crops that the farmers produce, they have this system where they don't weigh the produce. They go with a bowl. And it's supposed to be a bowl that, if filled level to the top, is about 2.5 kilograms of produce, of beans or of soy or whatever. And so what tends to happen is the traders go out there, and the bowl is not, there's no standard size bowl. So they tend to have a bigger bowl. And not only do they have a bigger bowl, they put it in the crook of their arm and they fill it to the absolute top. They pile on the beans so they're overflowing on the top of this bowl. And so what typically happens is it's not 2.5 kilograms at all. It's 4 or it's 5 kilograms, but they only pay for 2.5. And so the farmers, they're price takers. They get offered a low price and they get ripped off. At least half of their beans get stolen. And of course, it goes on where the traders count the bowls and they double count. So they'll count, okay, here's 1 bowl, 2 bowl, 3 bowls, 3 bowls, 4 bowls, 5 bowls, 5 bowls. And each one of those bowls, the double counting bowls as well, have 4 to 5 kilograms of beans in there. So the farmers are losing, 1.5 to 2.5 kilograms of beans every time the trader fills a bowl. And they're only getting paid for 2.5 kilograms. It's robbery. And these are some of the poorest farmers in the world, and they're being robbed by these traders. And it was fascinating when we first turned up in the first communities to buy, and we bought a set of scales. And I'm not sure that the farmers had actually seen a set of scales before. Some of them had, but not all. And they said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, we're going to weigh your beans. No, we want you to buy the bowls, the traditional method. And we said to one of the farmers, we said, okay, you've got your bag of beans there. How many Ghana cedis, that's the currency, how many Ghana cedis do you think you will earn from when we buy those beans off you? And because the farmer looked at it, and I don't doubt that he highballed it, like he was probably thinking he was going to get 400 cedis, and he said, I think I'll get 600 cedis for this bag of beans. So we said, okay, pop it on the scale. So he popped it on the scale, and based on the weight, we paid him 1,200 cedis. So we paid him double what he said he thought he was going to get, and probably triple what he actually thought he should get. And his eyes came out of his head like a crayfish. He was like, wow, what? Yeah, we said, we're paying you for every bean. These traders have been stealing from you for years. We're not here to do that. We told you that we will work with you in a different way. And so word got around very quickly. So suddenly all these beans were coming out, and as we went round the communities, our partner communities, the farmers were ready, and they would bring their beans, and we'd be under the meeting trees weighing these beans. And it was a time of celebration. There were kids everywhere, huge bags of beans. Unfortunately, some of the farmers hadn't thought we would come back, so they didn't really farm the Bambara in a productive way. They didn't do the weeding, for example, and the weeds crowded out the plants, so they didn't get very good yields. So some of the farmers came with huge bags where they'd done the weeding and they'd been very careful about their work. They were getting, like I say, 1,200, even 2,000 cedis for their beans, and there are other farmers who were getting 50 to 100 cedis, or even some who didn't even harvest because their crop was so bad. That was a bit frustrating for us. We'd given them the beans, but again, our mission in life was not the yields. Our mission in life was to show to the farmers that we were different and that they could trust us. When we said we were going to turn up with seed, we turned up with seed. When we said we were going to be there during the growing season and give them support and advice, outreach, we did that. And when we said we were going to turn up at the end of the year and buy the beans, we did that too, and we paid a good price. So it was marvellous for me to be sitting in the communities, and a couple of times I was the cashier, I was handing out the money to the farmers, and the smiles on the faces were just fantastic. And one of the best experiences was we went to one community and we got there about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were so many farmers and so many beans coming in. We were there most of the day, and I think it was about 2 o'clock. We were sitting there and more beans coming, and then a couple of farmers came by with a bike, and on the bike was loaded all of these tin or what they call zinc sheets for their roof. And we said, what are you guys doing? They said, well, you bought that Bambara from us in the morning. We've been to the market and we've bought some zinc for our roof because, we've just got a grass roof and it's very old. And when it rains, all the water comes in. And because we've grown the Bambara, we've now been able to go and afford to buy some zinc for our roof. It was just such an amazing moment where we really understood just how powerful and just how important the project was to these people. So it was great. It was a great experience. And, the season wound down. We bought all the beans. They've been exported now, getting ready to be made into What If Foods products. And we're getting ready for 2023. And here's what I think is the revolution. Mashoud, who's our partner there, as I mentioned earlier, his phone has been ringing off the hook from communities all around the whole of northern Ghana who grow Bambara. They've heard about the project. Words got around about this project, and that these people are coming and they're giving seed, they're giving support, and they come and they buy the beans at the end of the year. In 2022, we had 980, I think it was, farmers who planted. And this year, it looks like we're going to have somewhere around 6,000 to 7,000 farmers who are registering to plant across the whole of northern Ghana. It's extraordinary, and they are all fired up. And I think that because those farmers who didn't really farm in a proper way last year because they weren't sure we were coming back, I think they're going to farm in a proper way this year. And so what that means is we'll end up with higher yields, which means the farmers get greater returns. You know, it's great for what if, but it's absolutely brilliant for the farmers, and it's great for the soils because the soils up there are terribly degraded, and the Bambara, being a legume, puts nitrogen back into the soils. So that was fantastic. The other thing that happened was that we taught the farmers how to use biochar. I'm not going to go into all the technical details of biochar, but you make biochar using biomass, waste from agricultural fields. It could be peanut shells, for example, or corn cobs, or rice husk. And you burn it in a way at a high temperature, but in a way where you have restricted oxygen. It's exactly the same process, a process called pyrolysis, that you use to make charcoal, where you burn wood at high temperatures but with restricted oxygen. And what happens is that all of the liquids and other materials that are in the wood, or in this case in the agricultural waste, get burnt off, and you're just left with the carbon superstructure of that peanut shell or that corn cob or the rice husk. And what's fascinating about that is that carbon superstructure is absolutely full of tiny little pores, tiny little holes. And what it means is it acts like a sponge. And this is incredibly interesting up in those very, very dry regions. Even if it's the rainy season, it'll rain, and it might not rain for 3 to 4 days. And of course, what's happening now with climate change is that the rains may not come again for 5 or 6 or even 10 days. And when you've got a crop in the ground and it's growing, and it doesn't get rain for an extended period of time in these very, very poor sandy soils that do not hold moisture, having a little sponge sitting there at the base of the roots of the plant has a huge impact and holds onto the water. So the water doesn't wash away, it becomes available for the plants. This is ancient technology. There's ancient biochar in soils in the Amazon that have been found to exist way back 4,000, 5,000 years ago. It's still in the soils today. And so this is an ancient technology, but of course with the rise of the chemical fertilizer industry after World War II, it just got pushed aside because the idea was, we could get greater yields using these chemical fertilizers, and they're so much easier. So people stopped making biochar. They even forgot about biochar. So as we've gone into these communities, I'm sure that any of the great-grandfathers that are still alive will probably remember biochar, even the grandfathers. But the young people don't. The young farmers don't know about it. And here are these mountains of peanut shells, for example, that are agricultural waste, and corn cobs that they just burn. They just take out into a field and burn. And we're saying, hold on a minute, we can make biochar out of that. And you can put that on your fields. So in June last year, in July actually, when we were planting, in June we got them to make the biochar. We taught them how to do it. You can just make it in a hole in the ground. You can make it in an old oil drum with some holes in it, just been properly cleaned, of course. And we taught them how to make it, and we put it on some demonstration fields. And across 17 demonstration fields, when we went back in November to do the harvest, absolutely extraordinary result. We found that on average, we were getting 26% yield increase in the Bambara that was grown with biochar. And in some cases, that was up to 40% yield increases. And again, in a year where the price of fertilizers was so incredibly high because the price of fossil fuels was high, the farmers just couldn't believe it because they can't afford fertilizer. And here, just by burning in a special way their corn cobs or their peanut shells, they could get these sort of yield increases on their crops. And of course, it's not just on Bambara. It could be on their maize crops. It could be on their rice crops. It just blew their mind. And so what's been unfolding since is that we're training the farmers how to make biochar. So it's fantastic. And this season, there'll be a lot more biochar spread around. Still not enough for all the fields, but we're just getting started. And what's beautiful about the biochar is that it does put carbon back in the soil, so it's great for carbon sequestration, and it stays in the soil for at least 100 years. So it's great for removing carbon from the atmosphere, but it really does hold that water, and it holds nutrients as well. So we're going to do more trials this year of mixing the biochar with some manure and see if that makes a difference to the Bambara. We're sure it will. On top of that, I mentioned earlier the pest repellents, and during the year, as we went around the communities, we saw that things like their health centres were very, very poorly equipped. In many communities, they don't have schools, or if they do, the parents have built a small school, but they don't have any books. The children don't have any books. They don't have any writing materials, any notebooks. They don't have any textbooks. I mentioned this in the previous Reflections on Ghana podcast from July 22, where these kids just get stuck in primary school. They cannot break free and they cannot find themselves on a path to greater learning because they can't pass the tests to get out of primary school. Absolutely tragic. So we bought school materials, learning materials, learning kits for some of the schools. We bought some health equipment for one of the health centres that services 2,000 people. The women there, for example, didn't have any proper mattresses on the beds where they would go after giving birth. They were being asked to sit on just wire frames. Terrible. And so there was no privacy screens. There was no forceps, yes, and there was no suture kits for the women after giving birth. So, when we bought this equipment, the women were just so pleased. And I would say one of the greatest compliments, I've been blessed to have worked in so many countries, but one of the most wonderful things that kept being said again and again and again as we went around our work last year is the farmers said to us in community after community, they said, no one's ever worked with us like this before. And of course, on the one hand, it breaks your heart to think, well, why not? Nothing that we're doing is particularly special. It's really just based on treating these farmers with respect and, paying them a good price for their material, supporting them to grow it so they get good yields, supporting their communities so that they can have their kids go to school, they can get good health treatment in the health centre. This is not rocket science, and it shouldn't be something that's unusual. It should be the norm. And so as we move into 2023 and we're looking at having, last year, as I say, I think it was 980 farmers. We're going to be somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000 farmers is my guess. We are going to produce a lot of beans and it's all very exciting. So this is why I called this episode Regenerative Revolution. I think that we're starting. Obviously got a long way to go. The soils are very, very poor. We've got a lot of Bambara to grow to bring nitrogen back to the soils. We've got a lot of work to do with the biochar. But we've started on our journey. And the most important thing that I think underpins this notion of regeneration is that we have gone a long way to build relationship with the farmers and a trust-based relationship based on when you say you're going to do something, you go and do it. And of course, that's only 1 year in. I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities for us to fail along the way. I hope we don't. Our commitment is not to. Our commitment is actually to do all of these things and to take our project to scale. It's a fascinating journey. And as we've gone around and opened the project to new communities in new regions this year, it's just been marvellous to see that some of that cynicism still remains, but it's a lot less because they've heard word coming through the grapevine about what we did in Northern Region. So that's it. Yeah. So look, I'm going to share some more about what's happening in Ghana and other insights because I do think it's such a fascinating project. There does seem to be a lot of interest in what we're doing. As I said, I'm striving to write a book about it, but there you are. And one thing I would mention, if you are interested in this sort of work, regenerative agriculture, if you're a social entrepreneur looking to get some projects up and running, I've started a community. It's called A Different Way Community. My company's called A Different Way. The foundation that I work through is Pond Foundation. But the company's called A Different Way, and it's all oriented around doing things differently, doing things in the right way. So if you're interested to learn more about A Different Way community, I encourage you to visit our sign-up page, which is just join.adifferentway.community. That's join.adifferentway.community. If you're interested in what we're doing in Ghana, regenerative agricultural projects, if you're interested in being a social entrepreneur and doing your own work or bringing change where you are, the community might be of interest to you. So have a look at that and see what you reckon. All right. Well, thanks very much for listening. I'm Scott Poynton, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye.